everybody, you're very welcome to this talk on how I write lectures. Originally it was going to be called How to Write Lectures, but then I figured, well, I don't know how other people write lectures. I'm not sure how to write lectures for everybody, but I know how I write them for myself. And as I said in the abstract for this talk, I know it's not the most efficient way, but you develop habits over time and then you think, all right, well, this works for me, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. So really the purpose of the talk is just to say, here's what I do and see if that makes sense for you. And I'll try as far as possible not to talk about the lecturing part, just simply the writing of the lectures. So if we assume you've just been given a new module, you're not familiar with the topic or you are familiar with the topic, and then you've been asked to write a series of 12 weeks on it, how would you do that? So I'd say 80% of the talk will be about the process of writing the lectures, and then 20% will probably be about lecturing, interspersed a little bit, because it's a completely different task. And I think there's a totally other talk on, once you're face-to-face with students, how to change your lectures so that they suit the class that's in front of you. But this is how to start writing them. I would love if every lecturer in the school gave this talk, because I'd be fascinated to see how other people write their lectures, because I don't really know. It's not something that's well documented even in the academic literature. So for me, when I think about writing lectures, I divide it into 3 parts: preparing to write the lecture, actually doing the lecture bit, and then thinking about what I've done and thinking how I can change it. Developing it I see as 3 bits: define what the lecture is about, designing it, and then redesigning it. And designing it is 3 bits as a beginning, middle, and end. And the beginning has 3 bits, the middle has 3 bits, and the end has 3 bits, so that'll be the format of this talk. We'll talk more about the fact that everything is in 3s in a minute. Prepare. So how do I prepare to write a lecture? So, for example, I was asked over the summer to teach a databases course for an undergraduate, 3rd year, I think it was. I've taught databases for first, second, third, 4th year undergraduate, and for all of our master's courses as well. So, and I was a DBA, so teaching databases shouldn't be a big deal. And I've always had the attitude, look, I should be able to teach any undergraduate course. I'm a computer science lecturer, it's not that big a deal, it's not that difficult, and I do feel that. And when I was asked, would I teach a databases class, I went, sure, no problem at all. But then in August, when I sat down to prepare, I always get it in an extraordinarily white panic of fear, going, oh my God, I don't know how to do this, I don't know anything about databases. What am I going to do? And I really, no matter how confident I am, I've been lecturing for over 20 years, and still every time I start a new course, I think, oh, I don't know what to do. This is really, really hard. Hopefully, what I think that helps me do is always make sure I do a good job. So that panic definitely helps me. What kinds of resources do I look for to get started? I wouldn't say the DIT is necessarily unique, but it's definitely in the minority of institutes that I've taught in the sense that every lecturer is happy who has taught a course to give you all of their notes and say, well, you go ahead and use those. That's really helpful, I think, because if the course module has been taught already by somebody or somewhere else and they're happy to give you their notes, their labs, their assessments, that's fantastic. Doesn't always work for me that I can teach somebody else's notes, so I have to kind of make them my own a little bit, just personalize them a little bit. I'll often go online and look for other courses, because a lot of computer science courses in particular have their notes online, so that's always good. And then embarrassingly enough, even though I did graduate in 1995 and computers have changed a tad since then, I do look at my own college notes sometimes, not necessarily for the information, just in terms of having a totem almost, something to say, okay, I've got something, I can base this around, or a bit of a roadmap for it. Other things are textbooks, and again, even if it's an area I know a lot about, I really like to get a textbook. And again, I might never use it, but just to be able to look at it when I'm writing notes and go, okay, it's there, I'm safe, I won't get killed, this isn't going to destroy me, because I know I've got a textbook if worst comes to worst. Obviously, we go into Google Scholar and see if there's any exciting papers. I would read a lot of the computer magazines just to see what's happening anyway, and read the Register and Slashdot and sites like that all the time. So it's good to keep up with current events. and news events are always good. My own work experience I can always bring into it, and the sources like Wikipedia, which I use all the time because I think it's a good source, not for students, but definitely for lecturers, because often with the computer science topics in particular, it's very well written, it's very well agreed between academics and researchers in a lot of different countries, and they've reached a good compromise in terms of definitions of technologies and ideas. And SlideShare as well. I put all my slides up on SlideShare. It's a sharing site. So that's my basic approach. Collect a load of material, collect way more material than I need, and then that eases my anxiety a great deal, because otherwise I'm a blithering wreck of panic going, oh, I can't do this. But then I've got a lot of stuff, I think, all right, I can get a week out of some of this, and a week out of other this, and a week out of other this, and then I can get through it, I think. Then in terms of developing the slides themselves, 3 parts: define, design, and redesign. So define is, and this is just for me to remember, because I know some lecturers have very good memories, but I have a very hard time remembering an hour. I certainly have a very hard time remembering 3 hours, and I teach a weekend class where it's 6 hours, and I just have a hard time remembering what I'm going to do for 6 hours. So one thing that helps me an awful lot is if I can think of a one word that is the purpose of this lecture, then even if I'm not sure what the next words I'm going to say are, I can always fall back on that. So for example, if I'm teaching operating systems and I'm looking at memory management, I know the key thing there is an efficient balance between space and speed. So then as long as I know, no matter what gets said, as long as I always go back to say, and of course we're looking for that balance between space and speed. If that's the motto, the tagline, the strapline for this class, then as long as I have that, I'm okay. So what that means is I need to write out a lecture first, and then I go, all right, well, what's this about? What's the one word? Is it about making it as simple as possible, accuracy, usability, accessibility, distributability, modularizability? What is the one word? And once I know that, then I can go and rewrite the lecture notes in a way that's the theme that goes through it. But I find that very helpful for myself, having a theme, and then I can always have that word in my mind and that word ready to say. Equally as well, and you've just seen it, it helps me an awful lot to remember what I'm saying if I can base my lectures around a number. So in this particular example, everything is in 3s. There's 3 main parts. The middle part has 3 subsections. The middle of the 3 subsections has 3 subsections within that, and each of that has beginning, middle, end, 3 parts. So in terms of remembering what's coming, I find it really easy to remember it if I've got a number in my head. I can do 6 as well, but that's really just 2 3s, and 9 at a stretch, and that's 3 3s. 8 I can do as 8 octaves, or if the 7 things I need to teach, sometimes I'll just try and associate them with 7 colors of the rainbow, and then that'll help me remember them as well. But I need something to help me remember the content. If it's not the number, then I visualize it. Sometimes if I'm talking about a topic that's very broad, then I'm bringing it down to a specific notation or terminology or example or something like that. If I can see it as that, if I can see it, okay, the first 10 minutes I'm going to start broad, and then I'll narrow it down, that helps me a lot in terms of remembering what I'm teaching and knowing where I'm going. And then if I'm halfway down here and I think I could make a very broad point again, I go, no, I've finished the broad bit, I need to be narrowing down now. Although with a topic, let's say like, I don't know, database normalization, you're doing the general idea of normalization, and then you have to bring up the idea of denormalization. And you might have an example of normalization there and go, okay, but sometimes you break up the tables too much, so you need to denormalize. And then I think, okay, denormalization is this triangle. Normalization is this one, so I'm bringing this down to an example, but an example I use here spreads this out to a general theme. This might seem, I don't know if other people do this, but this helps me enormously when I'm teaching, because I always know again, okay, I've brought in the new topic now, so I'm reducing talking about the main topic and increasing talking about, I'm going to finish off talking about the main topic at the end. So if I've got a shape, it helps. Sometimes if I'm doing, let's say, in operating systems, I'm talking about the job manager, which manages batches of processes. And then we get down to an example, and then I say, and the process manager, which is another sub-example. I'll start with the example I finished at the job manager and spread it out into process manager. So some lectures are like that. It's two distinct topics almost, but they're connected. And I have to find, when I design the lecture, what the connecting point is, and it's usually an example. For this particular lecture, though, I'm visualizing it as this in my head. I'm seeing it as 3 main points divided into 3 subparts. And each of those 3 are 3 things. So as long as I know there and I know I'm here at the moment, I know what route to go down then, and it's no problem for me. Visualizing it helps me a lot. The other thing I am using of late is cue cards, and I'll just bring them along to remind myself and just look at them. Because they have the school logo on the back, they look like they're official. Whereas if I use 3x5 index cards, it'll look like I wouldn't know what I was talking about. This looks like I'm Graham Norton going, oh, hello, 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 how is everybody here? And the other thing I find, which is very helpful, which I don't know if anybody does this, or maybe everybody does this, I learn off the summary at the end, so that I know exactly what I'm going to say at the very end that summarizes everything we've done. So then if I know that, then I know what we've covered. Does anybody, other lecturers, do you learn off the summary at the end? Just me, so all right. So then, for example, in this lecture we covered database normalization. We looked at the first 4 levels of database normalization. We looked at the first normal form, where we identified the primary key and identified any repeating attributes within the primary key. Second normal form, we looked at partial dependencies between a composite primary key and non-key fields. Third normal form, we looked at dependencies between non-key fields and other non-key fields. And finally, we looked at Boyce-Codd normal form, or 3.5 normal form, sometimes called, where we looked at dependencies between candidate keys and other candidate keys. We also looked at database denormalization and identified some cases where that might be possible. Thank you very much. So for all my lectures, I haven't taught database normalization in 10 years, but I can remember that. If I was saying it to students, I would say, so in this class we looked at database normalization, and I'd pause and think, what were we talking about again? But in my mind, I know exactly what words I'm going to say. So for every lecture I've taught at least twice, I have learned off a good chunk of a minute of the summary at the end. So then no matter where I am in the lecture again, I can refer back to that and go, okay, I know what's coming up and I know what I've done. And it helps me an awful lot as well, that. So it might be because I have a bad memory. I have a lot of things I rely on to help me memorize things. But particularly the end thing, even though I'll say it in a slow way and I'll go, and then we looked at second normal form, and it was about partial dependencies between a composite primary key and non-key fields. So even if I'm stumbling, go, what do I mean to say there? In actuality, I know exactly what I'm going to say, but I've rehearsed it so often, I can make it sound very natural coming out. So I'll repeat that to myself 100 times, 150 times, 200 times, until I know exactly those words. And if I know those words, then I know the whole lecture. All right, so then we're developing the lecture in terms of designing the content. For me, lectures have 3 parts, beginning, middle, and ends. And there's 3 parts to each of those 3 parts. In the beginning, and this is based on Robert Gagne's 9 events of instruction, but with my own kind of angle on it. So to start, you get the student's attention with silence. Silence can be extremely effective. Tell a joke. Jokes can be very fun, I think, sometimes. For master students, a silly joke is good. For undergraduate students, a more conceptual joke is better. So for undergraduates, I might say something like, did anyone hear about those muggings in the multi-story car park? They were wrong on so many levels. You're right, okay. But they're Christmas cracker jokes. Whereas for the master students, it might be something like, I'm just back from a flight from Hanover, and I've got this weird problem. My leg keeps making a funny sound. Every time I move it, it goes... The doctor said it's deep vein trumpetosis. I don't know. Terrible stuff. So they don't have to be good jokes. They just have to be kind of Christmas cracker jokes. So it's fun. And then it's like, okay, everybody knows this is a bit of fun. Magic trick. Playing a music video, which you've seen. I do that a lot. More for me than the students. But as soon as I stop it, then they know they have to pay attention. Equally as well, if I do that, then they know they have to pay attention as well. Yeah. Or something with noise, just to get their attention. Because that's a difficult transition, I think, between when everybody's settling into the class and then all right, we're all going now together. Tell them the goals of the class, and I said that at the start of this talk, that all we're doing is looking at how to write lectures. Maybe tell them a story. I think this focuses the mind effectively if you say to them, this might come up on the exam. Suddenly their attention gets going. And tell them tie it into what they already know. So if you can say it's something, we mentioned it last week, you may have seen this last year or another module, or this is a lot like what you've did in secondary school already. So if you can just tie it in, then you're almost saying, sure, you know this already, and I'm just adding a bit of detail to it. And that gives them ownership of the content a lot more, I think. Interestingly enough, I was reading a paper last night, and they were saying, and I'm amazed, but I could well believe it, that if you show a picture of nature in the middle of a talk, it relaxes the participants, the students down a bit, and it's as if they just got a breath of fresh air. So every once in a while to throw in a picture of nature. I'm not sure about this one, maybe not a moving one, but definitely that is kind of like, I feel all relaxed now. So throwing in a few pictures of nature. It was in a book of papers, Making Learning Visible, I think it was called, or something like that. It was very interesting ideas anyway. All right, so then the middle bit of the lecture is presenting the students with examples and the information. So this is a well-worn and highly debated issue in education circles. Should we teach them the theory first and then give them an example? Or should we give them an example first and then teach them the theory? It is not fully decided what is the correct answer, which is great. So the academics, particularly educational researchers, an educational researcher might say example first, then theory, and write a paper about it and get to go to a conference in Hawaii. Then another researcher might say, no, it's the other way around, and they could get to go to a paper in Greece. And then they could write a paper together and say, well, maybe it's a bit of both. And they could get to go to a conference in Germany or something like that. So academics don't like coming up with solutions, because if you come up with solutions, you don't get to go to conferences, which is really boring. Whereas if we leave these questions open and we debate them a lot, that means I can write a paper, you can write a paper, we can write a paper together, then we can fall out and write papers against each other all the time, going to Egypt, California, Hawaii, and places like that to spread our knowledge. My take on this is, and this is only my view, babies learn by example. Babies learn not to put their hand on hot stove, classic behaviorist example, by doing it once, doing it twice, and then generalizing that from specific to general. So then that would argue for examples information. Some students, and some educational researchers in fact, have argued that students have slightly more developed brains than babies. Having read 16 final year proposals in the last evening, I'm not 100% convinced that that is or isn't the case, but we do feel that in general, with undergraduates, it might be handier to start with an example without any fancy terminology, and then bring the theory in afterwards, explain how that generalizes afterwards. Whereas for master's students, they should be able to cope with example theory or theory example either way. Does that make sense? Do people normally do, hands up who normally does theory and then example? Hands up who normally does example and then theory? So I think it's very debatable. That's perfect, 50% each. Perfect, so that's exactly true. There's a great debate about it. I think as long as you move it around every once in a while, there's no harm in it. In terms of the content, the argument, I would say, for undergraduates is start with an example, explain the information without using any computer science specific terminology straight away. There's no point saying we're talking about database normalization. Just say we'll look at a way of designing databases to make it as efficient as possible. Explain first normal form and then say, and that's called first normal form. Because there's no point telling them a word that they don't know the meaning of it. It's just going to mean their brain is in a state of pause until they find out the meaning of, and it's hard for them to concentrate on every other thing you're saying. So general education theory says, explain it first, then say, and by the way, that's called Afghanistan, Bananistan, or whatever. And then add in details as appropriate. Find good videos online of computer science lecturers. MIT has a lot of good stuff online. The Khan Academy has good computer science lectures. Plenty of good people, plenty of famous computer science lecturers like Edgar Dijkstra and Ted Codd and people like that. Leslie Lamport, there's videos of him online. Plenty of important computer scientists that they could look at videos of. Providing them help understanding the material. Giving them links to other sites, giving them links to videos, and I'll just switch to another set of notes, clean for a little bit, and then pop back out later. So things that seem to work for me at least. Well, this works for me because I like this. It helps me enormously if I'm teaching a topic, if I know something about the people. So if I'm talking about Pearson correlation, if I know about John Pearson, if I'm talking about Shannon's limit, if I know about Claude Shannon, if I'm talking about Moore's law and I know who Gordon Moore is, it helps me a lot if I know a sentence about them. Sometimes when I see lectures from SlideShare, they put in a biography of the person, and I think that's just a little bit mean. And worse yet, if they put in a smallish picture of it, I think that's okay, but damn it, you could go crazy. And just for the students who have an interpersonal preference, that they want to connect with the person, if they can see, oh, Gordon Moore was just some other bloke, Thomas Kuhn was some geezer, just like me. For some lecturers, for some students, that will connect profoundly with them, and they'll always remember whatever you're teaching because you've given them this cognitive anchor of a picture of the person who helped invent it. Imre Lakitosh. John Tukey, old and young, he did jackknife analysis and fast Fourier transform algorithm. In his book, Exploratory Data Analysis, he created the box plot in 1977. So he's kind of important. Linus Torvalds, never heard of him. Or worse yet, if I get very bored, I do baseball card style things, which is fun. So this is Ted Codd. He helped invent database normalization. I'm stuck on database normalization. And with Ray Boyce, invented Boyce-Codd normal form. Ted Codd and Ray Boyce worked for the CIA in the early 1970s to develop a project called, I'm sure everybody knows this, Project Oracle. One of their staff was Larry Ellison. We have no picture of Ray Boyce. In 1973, they finished Project Oracle for the CIA. 6 months later, Ray Boyce died of an aneurysm. Ted Codd went a bit crazy ever since. So when I think of Boyce-Codd normal form, I think about Ted Codd going slightly mad, Ray Boyce getting an aneurysm right after working on a CIA project. That story has two benefits. One, as it happens, it's true. But more importantly, now when I think about Boyce-Codd normal form, at least I've got some anchor and I go, oh, okay, well that's, if I like the people bit, I've got a good story now. Don Chamberlain, database people, Chris Date, Jim Gray, may he rest in peace. Chen notation, Bachman notation, Radcliffe, okay. Something else, some students who like to be categorical, like timelines. If you do a timeline for them and say, this is, let's say, the Linux timeline, various versions of Linux. That was version 0.01 of Linux in 92, version 1 in 94, version 2 in 1996, version 3 in 2001, and look at all the other versions of Linux. Even before version 1 of Linux was released, Debian and Slackware were already released. And before version 3, Fedora, Arch, Oracle, Ubuntu, Gentoo, Knopex, all of those were released. So again, for some people, this really appeals to them in terms of, and all you need to do is Google timeline of Linux, and that's not very difficult to do. Perfect. Pictures of animals. Some people get like pictures of animals, hilarious pictures of dogs wearing glasses and things like that. Some students like that if you can tie it into your content, or Clever Hands, the horse that could do multiplication and division and things. Poems, you know, some students will feel they're getting a rounded education if you give them, if you're teaching the if statement, it's obvious you're going to do Robert Frost, two roads diverge from yellowy wood, because you have a then and an else. So it can't be that hard. Or Kipling's I knew 6 honest serving men, when you're talking about writing what, who, when, where, why, and when. Tell them a story in pictures as well. It's no problem doing that. So I teach a class on techno-stress where I say, the problem with technology is it's not that individually it's not good, it's that collectively you end up with a lot of different technology on a daily basis. So you start off with your electric clock, and then you probably push the snooze button, and then you have to have a shower, which is electric as well, so it's technology. Then you may microwave your breakfast or boil a kettle. Then you get into your car. You might take out money before you go to work. You go into work, you listen to voicemail, email, and you might listen to the fax, but nobody uses faxes anymore. When you go home, you might be doing television, you might be playing games, you might even be on your computer, God knows, or on the phone. So individually, all of these different things are great, but collectively, it's a lot of technology that you deal with on a day-to-day basis. So if I'm trying to tell that picture, I'm trying to say there's too much of it, I'm putting pictures on top of pictures and layers and making it all, it's all confusing. So I hate to go Marshall McLuhan, but the medium is the message in that sense. We can use images to convey as well as our verbal information. Nice pictures, I think, are very important. And I have to say, when I went to see Brian Cox twice now, the astronomer, astrophysicist perhaps, one thing he did was have a big screen behind him and show big pictures. And I thought, that is cool. And when we're teaching about circuit boards or we're teaching about memory management, we can do it. We can show big pictures of stuff. And it's cute and it's pretty, and you don't have as many lovely things as pictures of big computers, I think. Some students have a kinesthetic preference. We can't necessarily, that means they like to grab stuff and push stuff around, so if we give them things to build on slides, though, we can make it, at least the slides, a bit kinetic. We can add in animations. If I'm explaining a computer network, which I do, just to show, it's just a bunch of phone cables stuck between computers and send packets to each other. And then if we need to explain a ring topology, if host 1 needs to talk to host 6, it just goes around a ring like that, whereas a tree topology, if host 5 needs to talk to host 4, it'll try one branch, it's not there. It'll try the second branch, come on, go on down there. It's not there, and I can do all kinds of funny stuff while I'm doing it, all right, and then it'll go to the final branch of the tree in the network and go along here, come on, hurry up, and then it'll go down here, and then it'll do all that. So we can do all kinds of silly stuff like that. We can do just templates for creating things like that, API covers, and I think this is always a nice way of presenting data. Bouncy balls. Yeah, so there's plenty of things you can do animation-y wise for students who have a kinesthetic or even a kinetic preference. They like that a little bit. PowerPoint is very effective. I have to say though, anytime I see a PowerPoint presentation where somebody does bouncy stuff in it, I always ask them for a copy of it, just so that I can understand what they've done. And on SlideShare, there's plenty of good examples. So for me, I see this slightly as some lecturers, even if they've never taught using acetate, plastic, sheets of plastic where you write on the sheet of plastic and get an overhead projector and project it onto the screen. Some people, even if they've never done that, still create slides as if they were just writing on the whiteboard or writing on acetate. When I started in DIT, I used to write on a roller on acetate in the good old days, and then a few years later, we'd write them in PowerPoint, print out the slides on acetate, and then again, use the overhead projector to project. Some people, lecturers, even if they've never done that, they just seem to don't realize putting pictures in can have an affective and emotional impact on the students' attention to what's going on. Grand. And then how we finish off a lecture, which isn't the end of this talk, I'm afraid, but it's the finishing off of the lecture. Give feedback to students and advice. So if you're giving feedback, I always start with, I like that you thought of this. I would have liked if you had thought of this. So that's the type of language I use if I'm saying you did this wrong. That's code for it. Or in coaching and indeed in primary school teaching, they talk about 2 stars and a wish, 2 good things. And if you need to tell them bad news, just coat it with 2 good things. I like your haircut, Robert. Your exam was terrible. That's a nice top you have. Something like that, where we've cushioned the blow of your terrible exam with 2 nice things about you. Possibly not as variant as that. All right, give the students a proper assessment. Just for me, for the last couple of years, I've been piloting this as an approach, which is all my assessments look like an exam paper. I think it's extremely effective. It perks them up a lot. So instead of the date the exam is happening on, it's the due date of the exam. Instead of saying examination, it says assignment number. All the other information is the same. Answer all questions, obviously, because it's an assignment. It accommodates them to the notion of what exam papers look like, particularly for first years. And then if we go down, I mean, the questions look kind of like exam paper questions anyway, so it's fine. I definitely think that seems to work a lot for first years. They like it, they take it a bit more seriously because it's got that exam paper cover on it, so it might be worth thinking about. Finish off the lecture by giving a summary, which, as I said, I can recall almost any topic I've taught, that 1 minute summary, and I can say it very quickly if I have to, because then I know exactly what my topic is about. All right, so then once I have a lecture designed, then I go into a redesign phase and go, what else do I need to add or take away from it? So if version 1 of my slides are the complete first draft, then I do a second draft where I look at, is there anything I've put in that I thought was a good idea at the time that I can just take out and maybe make another lecture of, or just take out because it's not as relevant as I thought it was? And again, when I finished the first version, then I have that one word, it's about efficiency, object orientation, ability, whatever it's about, then I know if there's any slides that are not to do with that, I just take them out. Or maybe I need to expand them a bit more. If I have 3 sections though, then if section 1 has 10 slides, section 2 has 10 slides, and section 3 has 90 slides, then I go, oh no, that's way out of kilter, so I need to break section 3 out into parts, or summarize it down, or add 80 slides into section 1 and section 2, which could happen. And then Google jokes. Just Google operating system jokes, or database jokes, or programming jokes. There's plenty of them online. And just say one. It doesn't matter if they don't laugh or not. It's just to say, all right, well, this is a bit of fun. Plenty of visual jokes as well. Pictures of Cookie Monster eating cookies, and the computer said delete cookies or something like that. There's loads of them. So the odd old joke, I think, there's no harm in it. Simplify the language as much as possible. So the 3 stages we're talking about are prepare, develop, and reflect. In the initial draft of this, there were preparation, development, and reflection. But preparation, development, and reflection just seemed too complicated for me, and I'm creating these headings so I can change preparation to prepare, development to develop, and reflection to reflect, just to make it cleaner. One thing that really hammered this home to me is, and it's happened a few times, when there's a lecturer, a student in the class who's deaf, and there's us 2 signers in the room signing. So very often if I'm talking and I look over at the signer and I go, I can tell if they're spelling letters or saying words. I always say, what are you spelling there? And they go, polymorphism. And I go, oh, did I say polymorphism? Okay, let me say it in a different way. So, because sometimes I think as an academic, I say long words to impress people, or I say long words because it's the language I'm used to speaking. Whereas I can say, we will use instead of we will utilize, and there's no loss of information there. So we can simplify our language in a lossless way and still communicate effectively what we're saying. We don't want to reduce the ability, the skills of students at discourse, though. We're not simplifying for the sake of reducing the complexity of what we're saying or infantilizing their language in any way. But particularly when we're starting to explain a concept, we can explain it in fairly plain English at the start and then gradually ease them into more complex language. Practice for me, as I said, that last summary bit, I'll practice that 150 times, 200 times, no problem. As it happens, I have dog, so then I can go out to the park with Tiny and just say to Tiny, so database normalization, it's 4 parts, and I'm in the park every day or walking the dog along the road, so you can just talk it out, and that helps me a lot. And then the final part of developing the slides is a reflection part, and yeah. And maybe even to think about, there's a lot of open education resources out there that have excellent content, and once you're happy with what you've done, well, once I'm happy with what I've done, then I gird my loins and go, all right, I'm going to look at what other people have done and just see if there's anything major I'm missing. If they're saying stuff that I think, oh, it'd be nice to add that in, I don't worry about it, but if it's something major I've missed, I'll look at things like Connections or the MIT OpenCourseware or MITx or the Open Course Library. Others might include the Saylor Foundation, Coursera, Future Learning, Udacity. So those definitely. And indeed, just looking at videos from Academic Art or the Khan Academy or even YouTube, there's always good information in there. And repositories like Merlo or the Open Educational Resource Commons site or the National Repository of Online Courses or iTunes University. So there's plenty of sites out there that you could find nice clips to add into your talk, but also just as a sanity check to make sure you haven't forgotten anything. There's plenty of textbooks out there as well, free computer science textbooks that you can always give to students or just have a look at yourself. Flat World Knowledge, the Global Textbook Project, the National Academy Press and Wikibooks are all good for that kind of stuff. Grand, that's enough links. So I write down, at the end of every class, I just write down how it went. So I've created a lecturer's journal myself, where for each class I say some notes if I need to remind myself what to say. What were the key points of the lecture? What good examples came up, either for me or other students? What updates do I need to make to my assignments or handouts because I've got errors in them? What went well, what went badly, and then what surprised me the most when I was teaching. And it could be one word or one sentence or a quick one and another page on lab. So for each class I do that. For each module I have a separate divider and I've guest lectures at the end, just because then I will learn and get better. And there's an oft kind of quoted idea in educational research in particular. Two lecturers who have both been teaching for 20 years. One has 20 years experience, the other has 1 year's experience that they've done 20 times. That's always quoted in educational research, the idea that if you don't reflect, then each year is your first year of teaching. So I definitely think having a reflective journal is a really, really helpful thing to go, okay, I didn't quite do that. If I'm teaching octave style, if I'm teaching 8 points, my take on it is if 6 of them come off well, I think that's a really good lecture. Rarely, if ever, does 8 points. If there's an hour of a lecture, if I feel like the students got 80% of it, I think, great, that was a really good lecture. If they get 100%, it happens maybe twice a year, I'd say that happens. Some days they get 50% and I go, all right, well, that was just not as good lecture as I hoped it would be. But I always allow myself to be disappointed when it doesn't go well, but not to dwell on it. I go, all right, what can I fix? What can I fix there? What went wrong there? One more thing I do, which I know anytime I give this talk, everybody always says, that's absolutely bonkers, but I'll say it anyway. After I give a lecture, as soon as I have an hour free or a couple hours free, I'll just give it again to myself. Just redo it one more time just to see exactly what I did right and what I did wrong. Where did that go wrong there? Or how did that go right there? So I just re-rehearse it one more time after it's done, just to capture exactly in my mind and consolidate. Okay, that's interesting. By re-saying it again, and then the next year when I teach it again, I barely have to think about what I'm teaching because it really concretizes what I'm teaching in my mind. But I always do that. I always try and reteach, and I will be doing it in 2 hours' time. I will be standing up here saying, in 2 hours' time, I will be standing up here saying, in 2 hours' time, infinite loop.